Hello, and welcome to Nostalgia Marcana. I'm your host, Doug Leaf. Each episode of this podcast, we'll look back on the movies, TV, games, people, and phenomena that we still love talking about all these years later, and ask ourselves why these bits of pop culture still enchant us today. This week, we'll be revisiting...
Today's subject is all about a place to call home, and for me, there's nothing that feels coming home quite like settling in to play a Final Fantasy game. This is a very special series that we've revisited once on the podcast before. We covered my personal favorite entry, Final Fantasy VI, a long time ago, but I'm very glad getting back into this series that really just completely wrecks the meaning of the word final, which because it's now in its 16th entry. So I'm really excited to talk about 9. 9 is a very special entry in the series. It's kind of an emotional favorite for anyone who loves this series because it's all about what makes this series great, the heart of it, and all of the fun and fantastical elements that led up to 9. So very excited to be covering this. But of course, it wouldn't be a Final Fantasy game if I didn't have at least one other member in my party. So we've brought a specialist in to talk about this game. Please welcome to the show, Rick Firestone from the Pixel Project Radio podcast.
Hey, Doug. Thanks for the invite to come on and talk about this game. It's one of my favorite games of all time. At various times, I've called it my absolute favorite game of all time. And, being that this is our first discussion together for a show, I'm looking forward to diving into it.
Yeah, and you've done a real deep dive into it because if you hop on over to Rick's show, he did a multi-part series of podcasts on this game going way deeper in detail than we're going to get to today. So before we kind of get to the usual stuff, our memories of the game and, what makes it special, please take some time to tell the folks all about Pixel Project Radio and why it's an awesome show they should be listening to as soon as they're done with this one.
Sure. So Pixel Project Radio is the show that I host. It's a now weekly, it used to be a little bit offset, but it's now weekly video game analysis podcast where it's primarily focused on narrative, not exclusively, but primarily, where we pick a game and do anywhere between 1 to 5 episodes on it. Silent Hill 1 was a recent one that just required 1 episode, so we talked all through that. And as you mentioned, Doug, Final Fantasy IX, that was a 5-part episode that had 4 episodes of discussion with another podcaster and 1 essay that I wrote. Not too long. I think it ended up being like 40 minutes. Nothing crazy. But the point of the show is to just analyze the games that we enjoy from an intelligent lens. So much in the same way that anybody could with literature or films or things like that. So we do tend to skew more towards narrative-based games. Some recent favorites were Celeste, Pentiment, 1000 Times Resist, things like that. But every so often, we do go into non-story games. Every March, obviously, Mario comes up every March. Have to, because of March 10, Mario Day. And it's a good time. If you're interested in checking it out, we're on most, if not all, of the major podcasting apps. We're on the various social medias. And you can check it out, listen if you like, drop a follow if you're into it. And, hope to see you around.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be listening to the show regularly, and I would encourage our listeners to subscribe as well. It's funny you mentioned Celeste in that list of narrative-based games. My daughter's name is Celeste, so I bought the game sight unseen without knowing anything about it, just going, oh, there's a game called Celeste. I should get that. Then it turned out to be kind of a big deal, and a game she is way too young to play. Not just because some of the story elements might go over her head, but because that game is hard as balls. Like it is very, very difficult. But she enjoys the big Celeste poster I put up in her room. So I had that, and I think I got my wife a Celeste shirt as well. Just, unfortunately for my son, there are no games that bear his name, so we'll have to wait. But I think Final Fantasy IX. You talked about this being a story-based game, and so as we go through this, we'll lay out some of the stuff for the listeners who may not be into video games as to what makes it special. And part of that is the Final Fantasy series is known for having these very long, really in-depth stories that, especially at the beginning, really set them apart from their peers. But before we go even farther to that, let's talk about our nostalgic memories. Tell me why this was the topic you wanted to pick for today.
Sure, yeah. So Final Fantasy IX, for me, I grew up, I don't remember exactly what year I got my first gaming system, but my first systems that I can remember, roughly in order, were the Sega Saturn, Game Boy Pocket. I never did get the original DMG. My neighbor had one. We got the Pocket. And after that, PS1. So before getting a PS1, I was largely playing fighting games, Pokemon, Pokemon, obviously, things like Mario Land, Wario Land, fighters on Sega Saturn like Virtua Fighter, Battle Arena Toshinden, and then, of course, Daytona USA. So not anything with a story, really. And the first story game that I can remember playing was actually Final Fantasy IX. My friend rented it. My best friend as a kid rented it from our local video rental store. And we played it, and it was kind of the first game that really threw a story-first experience my way. And back then I didn't have the vocabulary to put to this feeling, but in retrospect, I think it was the moment where I realized that characters on a screen on a video game screen, I should say, can have the same sort of feelings and emotions and ideas that I have. They're feeling a lot of the same things. And that's very, very cool. That's a step above encountering a youngster that has shorts and tells you how much he loves wearing shorts before you destroy his Rattata in like 2 hits. It's much more of an interesting experience, I think, even as a kid. Again, didn't have the vocabulary to say that at the time, but I think that stuck with me. And pretty much ever since then, games for me have largely been driven by that idea of finding a good story, finding those feelings that I can latch onto and say, I see myself in this, or I see something interesting about the world around me reflected in this game. And don't get me wrong, I love fighting games. I love Rocket League. I love Super Smash Brothers. But the narrative, the journey of the narrative, that kind of arc, that's what I love. And it all started with Final Fantasy IX.
I've generally feel the same way about games as well. The quote that comes to mind is the Big Lebowski, dude, the brain is the biggest erogenous zone. For me, I want a gaming experience to hit me the same way a great book or a movie would. I want to be taken on a really interesting, emotionally meaningful ride or resonant ride. And what's interesting is listening to you say all this. One, I deduce that you are a 90s kid. Just based on your first console, I'm an 80s kid. I was born in 1980. But what's interesting is my experience exactly mirrors yours, just with a different Final Fantasy game. So my first systems were the NES and the Super NES. And I remember a friend had the first Final Fantasy game, which has a story, but the characters you pick for that are ciphers. It's basically you build a Dungeons and Dragons party, so your characters are like a fighter, a black mage, put a pin in that, but they're not personages. But then we got what was in America Final Fantasy II. It was really the 4th entry in the series. Final Fantasy IV, and it blew me away because that entry did have characters with names and personalities and wants and needs and desires. And in retrospect, that story is kind of fluffy and kind of over the top and arch and silly. And then we got 3/6, and that just cemented it for me that okay, we can do some really incredible things story-wise. And go back to our episode on Final Fantasy VI to hear us talk about the stuff in that game. I did play 7 on PC when it came out. I started playing 8 and I fell off of it because I found it obtuse and hard to understand the way the junction system worked. So I was like, all right, no. And I didn't have a PS1 when Final Fantasy IX came around. I remember seeing friends playing bits of it, and it seemed interesting, but what I saw was so like disjointed, again, tiny bits and pieces of it. So I didn't really get much of a sense of what the game was like until I had a roommate with a PS2. And I was like, well, I better go get Final Fantasy IX. It'll still run the game on the 2. And I was floored. It is such an exceptional entry in the series, and I'm really excited we're talking about it today. Did you go back and play any of the entries that predate 9 at some point?
Oh, of course. I've at this point, so I haven't got through 1 through 5. I feel like I know 1 just through sheer osmosis of the culture. You see enough of things referenced, and you catch enough of the screenshots and the battle instances and whatnot. I feel like I kind of know that one. I have not played 2 through 5 yet. They are on my radar. I was going to get to 4, but then Tactics kind of reared its head, and I was like, I like that. But otherwise, yes, I have played 6 all the way up through 16 in some capacity. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So the ones I've played are 4/2, 6/3, 7, some of 8, 9, 10, 16, and a little bit of 13, I think. And a little bit of 15. I wasn't crazy about that one, but so I've played, I'd say slightly less than half of the entries in the series. I would say that for someone starting out going, well, where do I start? Number one, with very rare exception, they are not sequels. You do not need to play one to understand the story of the other. Each one is a standalone thing. In fact, so like when they came out with a sequel to Final Fantasy X, it was just called 10-2. Final Fantasy 11 is something else. So you can start anywhere in the series. It doesn't really matter. But I would say if you want something like this that goes down smooth and is very simple and accessible for people who've never done it before, start with Final Fantasy IV. That's the simplest version of kind of the modern thing. So if you're feeling like a very light JRPG snack, that's what this is, a JRPG, go give that one a try. Let's talk a little bit about what this game is. You want to take a minute to kind of explain what this gameplay is for someone who may have never seen it?
Just the gameplay?
Just in general, like the moment to moment, what you're doing before we get into like the world and the story.
Yeah, sure. The game is kind of divided up into 3 separate and distinct modes of play. You've either got cutscenes. Those are either pre-rendered. Those are called the CG cutscenes, or they're just in-engine. You're watching characters talk. That's the first mode. The second mode is exploring the overworld. So whether you're on the world map or whether you're exploring a brand new town, going into the various shops and inns and talking to the townsfolk about racing and jump roping, that's number 2. And the final one, the draw of the JRPG, is the party-based combat, the turn-based combat, I should say even. They're both true, but turn-based is kind of the hallmark of what Final Fantasy used to be and what JRPGs used to be as well, and still largely are. Those are kind of the 3 main things. There are other things you can do, like little mini games, but they're adjacent to the main experience. Those 3 are going to take up most of your time.
Yeah. So again, for most people whose conception of a video game is I'm a little chubby guy who runs from left to right, jumping over things, this proceeds more like a board game. You have up to 4 members in your party at one time. And this basically is Dungeons and Dragons with the computer acting as DM, handling all the math as you decide, all right, it's my turn. Am I going to attack this creature? Am I going to use a magic spell on him? Am I going to use a magic spell to cure me or my allies? And so the computer, looking at what you're equipped with, what your statistics are, rolls dice under the hood to determine, all right, well, did you in fact hit this monster, and how hard did you hit it? How much damage did you do? And then the monsters do the same thing back at you, and turns basically proceed like that. And it's a real big change for someone who is used to more kinetic forms of play. But it is, as you said, this is what Final Fantasy basically was. This is its identity up until really, I guess, things start to get weirder around 12. They start to really monkey with this format a little more.
Yeah, and that callback to having a dungeon master too, that's a good one to note. There's an argument to be made that Dungeons and Dragons is the single most influential thing on video games ever. And that's, like you said, that's what this is. Now they're expediting the dice rolls because it's all under the hood, like you said, behind the scenes. But that's still occurring. You're still rolling for crits. You're still rolling for accuracy, rolling for whether that status is going to come off this turn or come off the next turn. And, it's, if you are someone that's more used to playing as Mario or some hack and slash combat, it can be a bit of a reshifting of expectations. But I think it's really rewarding, especially with 9 too, and the way that they handle what's called the ATB system. And how fast-paced the game is compared to 10, for example, or even compared to, well, never mind, compared to 10, let's just say, compared to straight turn-based combat like D&D, it can be exciting. You have to keep thinking and stay on your toes. It's very fun. I'm a defender of this combat system.
Yeah, the ATB system is basically a shot clock where there's a counter that says, okay, it's your time to go. You can take a turn. You can sit there and think about taking turns as long as you want, but while you're doing that, the enemies have their own turns, and they'll keep taking them. So you have some time to think about what kind of move you're going to dial in, but you can't sit there forever. You can turn it off, but I think this does keep the pace up in a really positive way. And then the other thing you have to think about, of course, is your party's composition. Your party members have different strengths, weaknesses. So, your little black mage, who again MVP character of the series, he's really good at casting offensive black magic spells. You can teach your other party members to do that, but their spells won't be as effective as his. It's sort of the same way that like I can practice basketball all day long and I can get better, but I'll never be Michael Jordan. Like he'll always be. So, but I do like the way this game handles customization in terms of the way you can train your characters to learn new spells, skills, abilities, things like that. I really like this system. If you want to explain a little bit of how this works.
Yeah, sure. 9 is a little bit different from the previous games. If you're coming into this series from 6 or 7, those are two of the most popular entry points. Which, by the way, I also love 6. I adore that game. I think it's beautiful. But 6 and 7 take the approach that anybody can be anything. If you want your main character to be a white mage and a black mage at the same time, go for it. If you want him to do every single thing under the sun, you can make that happen. 9 goes back to the roots of the series, back to like 1 and 2, where everybody has a class. So like you said, the black mage is going to have the offensive black mage spells, and you're never going to be able to cast in the same way as he can. And that is, there are some folks that dislike it, some folks that really love it. I am in the latter. I really enjoy it. Partly because I think it impacts their character arcs narratively, but 2, it keeps a healthy divide within the party makeup, so you can always strategize and rotate in new loadouts to take down different bosses or try different enemies. It makes things exciting, so not everything is going to feel samey. My most recent playthrough, I actually did not use Vivi the Black Mage very much because I so often do. So I decided to try and mix it up, and used Freya, her class is Dragon Knight, a Dragoon, quite a bit, and I learned a lot of new things. It made the battles a lot more exciting and interesting because you have to sort of change up your strategies, and I really, really enjoy that. It's not my favorite battle system in the series, I will say that, but it's like a solid number 2.
Yeah, I mean, gameplay is all about interesting decision making, right? If you're asking me to make interesting, thoughtful decisions, that's what good gameplay is all about. And so you're right in that 6 and 7 kind of simplify this. You can basically, in those games, you equip a thing and it will enable you to, again, like say you learn like a fire casting spell. And if you keep it equipped long enough in 6, for example, you'll just eventually learn it and you don't have to keep the thing on your person anymore. You just now you've internalized essentially that spell. 7 does it a different way. You're carrying these little balls, these little marbles that get powered up as you, again, they gain experience, but it's always tied to the marble. But they kind of work it so you can carry a large number of them on your weapons and armor. 7 does it more like, 9 does it more like 6 does, where you equip, let's say, a sword. The sword comes with these abilities. You will learn them eventually. And you also, once you've learned them, you have a set number of points that goes up over the course of the game, but you can allocate those points. So for example, you can equip a thing that, say, makes you immune to petrification. That costs 2 points to use. And so you have to be choosy with, all right, I've learned all of these things, but I can't have them all active at once. I have to pick the ones that I think that are going to be situationally useful for the particular obstacles I'm up against, or that are just generally good to have because they're kind of good in all situations. But again, I like that. It makes the party makeup and what equipment you have and what skills you have equipped, all of that matters. You're making all of these strategic decisions along the way.
Yeah, and not just the allocation of those learned learned ability points too. You're also juggling the decision of, do I want to keep this lesser piece of equipment on that has a useful skill that I have not learned yet that might help me in these upcoming fights, or do I want to replace it with a better piece of equipment, gives me more defense or more attack, but I don't have that skill because I haven't internalized it yet. So it's a sort of juggling act. You're always making these informed decisions prior to battles, right? Once you're in a battle, you're committed. There's no turning back. But between and before, you can change these loadouts and juggle these considerations to give you a better affect in the party, to give you different abilities. And that's I some people think that feels a little too Excel sheet like and a little too you're doing all the thinking outside of the battle. I disagree. I think it's exciting. I think it makes the game more interesting.
It's preparation. And again, as long as you're not immediately in a battle, you can take all the time in the world to go monkey with all of these settings. So, you walk into a dungeon and you have a couple of fights, which you're able to, survive based on how you're kitted out. And from that, you've learned, okay, I kind of get what I'm up against now. Let me make some adjustments as I go. And, if you end up dying to the boss at the end of the thing, then you die and you restart and you go, okay, well, what can I do differently this time? And you keep on going. And that's basically the gameplay for the entire thing. It's this loop. The only other thing that's in the gameplay that we haven't really talked about, there's a couple, as you said, you called them mini games. There's two sort of things I wanted to highlight that are notable. One is the Mognet. Which is you find these delightful little creatures called Moogles. They were introduced, I think, in the 6th century was the first time you get Moogles. But they're these little, picture a koala bear that's white with big pink nose and some little bat wings on its back. They're adorable. I got my daughter a shirt with one, and we started playing a little bit of 9, actually. So she loves the shirt. She's okay on the game. We haven't had a lot of time to sit down and play it. But when you meet them in the world, they're all part of essentially this Moogle postal service. They're constantly asking you hey, if you see a Moogle with this name, give him this letter. And that goes on through the game. And I know it ties into some really like obscure side quest that, like, if you manage to do all of this, there's some very weird stuff at the end of that rainbow.
Yeah, that side quest. So there's kind of like two side quests that gets tangled into. One is the chocograph side quests, which is like they don't interact until the very, very end. But the other one is this secret end area / secret hidden boss, super boss that you can fight. And I mean, don't get me wrong, this whole side quest of Mognet doesn't have any consequence on the plot, but it's delightful. It's very pleasant the whole way through. I think the Moogles in 9 are the best iteration ever that Final Fantasy has ever done. 16s, I liked 16s a lot. They were these cute little things, but they didn't have the attitude that the ones in 9 have. Like, the ones in 9 will talk to you, and there's some funny moments too. Like, there's a particularly good one where you're saving this Moogle who's trapped in ice in this ice cavern, and Zidane, your main character, is like, "Hey Vivi, why don't use your magic, your fire magic," and you thaw the ice, and you end up burning his little butt, and he screams, "Ah, you bastards!" And it's, cute little moments like that you don't necessarily get in the other ones. That Mognet quest, though, I actually finished it. I've played this game, I've lost track of how many times. But I've only beaten it like, I want to say 5 or 6 times. And I just finished the Mognet quest for the first time ever back in 2020 when I replayed this.
That seems like a good pandemic thing to do when you have the time. Because, you really got to schlep far and wide to do this and backtrack a lot.
Oh, yeah. It spans literally the entire game.
Yeah. The other side game in this that's notable is the card game. That you collect cards throughout the world, and occasionally you find places where you can play against somebody. And it's this game where you've got a 3x3 grid. You put your cards down. The cards all have numbers and the cardinal directions that essentially, if your number is bigger than the other guy's number, then you win this little skirmish between the cards. So we don't have time to go into it in great detail, but I found this to be a reasonable in-game. I like it more than I know people really like the one in 8. I don't have a good memory of it. I know people really like the one in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which I'm fine with. I don't love. What's it, Queen's Blood? I've sort of like, I'll play it when I have to, but but this one I found pretty delightful.
Oh man, that's an unpopular opinion.
I know people love Queen's Blood. I find it somewhat. I have a hard time grokking it. Like, I have an idea generally of what's happening, but I'm not good at like strategizing. I usually just eventually luck into a victory in that game.
Oh no, I didn't mean Queen's Blood. I've actually not played the 7 remakes at all. I've played like 5 hours of the first one.
They're good.
I believe it. I've liked what I played. It's just, once you
have 200 hours to spare.
Yeah, exactly. Time just goes away from you. But no, I meant like finding the 1 in 9 pleasant. A lot of people really dislike it, and I get it. I do. I don't agree. Like, I like it perfectly fine. I think people love the 1 in 8 because the rules are simpler and it can directly impact your player stats. Like, if you want to break the game, you do it through the card game in Final Fantasy VIII. 9 doesn't do that, first of all. 2, they force you to play it for a story event about halfway, 60% of the way through.
Right. So if you haven't been honing your skills, now you've got to brush up.
Right. And 3, the reason that's most cited is there's a randomness to this. The way the card game kind of works, just a super duper quick overview, is your cards will have an attack stat and arrows. They also have a defense stat. If your arrow points at another card, you take that card. If the 2 arrows point at each other, they battle. Typically, you would think if the attack is higher than the defense, the attack wins. In this game, there's a little bit of RNG. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. I don't think it happens all that often. I'll be honest. I think it's generally in the logical favor, but it's there enough to be annoying. I get it. I still think it's fine. I'm never going to collect all the cards, but it's fine.
No, I have no. I definitely do not have the collect all the things gene. And now that I have like kids and even less time to play video games, it's definitely like, oh, look up what happens on YouTube when you collect all the things. I don't need to do that myself.
Yeah.
I don't need to Where's Waldo every game. Let's talk a little bit about the world of Final Fantasy IX before we get into the story itself. I think this is a really well-realized world. We mentioned Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons, of course, is itself an attempt to gamify the Lord of the Rings type experience, right? What would it be like to go on a fantasy quest yourself with someone playing the part of Tolkien, helping you along? And Final Fantasy IX's world is particularly, it's much more fantasy, especially 7 and 8, which are more, there's a lot more tech and like kind of cyberpunky type elements in 7 and 8. This gets back to the series' roots, more of a, true, sword and shield fantasy world with a little bit of steam energy thrown in. But yeah, I just love this setting.
Yeah, and that, going back to the roots, was 100% intentional too. This was the last game, at least in this series, and one of the last games ever on the PS1. It was the last Final Fantasy that was single digit, because then we're jumping to 10 on the PS2. And it was the last one where, at the time, what they thought was Sakaguchi and Uematsu would work together. They thought this was it. Yeah,
we should pull over just to mention for people who don't know, Sakaguchi is the designer for most of these games. He's the brains behind the games, and Uematsu is the composer. He is the John Williams of video games. So, sorry, continue.
No, that's totally fine, and that's an appropriate title for him. So all things considered, they thought they wanted to make this the last hurrah for them. They wanted to make a game for them as much as they did for us, and hats off. Hats off. They sure did it.
Yeah. So one of the things that is notable about this one in particular is this game is really interested in geopolitics. You have multiple nations in this game, as opposed to, say, like 7, where you kind of have a one world government for the most part. You have there is one smaller country kind of outlining that, but basically you've got kind of a unified government. 6 has like an evil empire and whoever is not in the evil empire. But here you have multiple states. They all have stakes in what's going on. In a whimsical kind of Tolkien-esque way, there's different like races of beings. So instead of everybody being kind of humanoid the way they are in most of these games, like you mentioned Freya, she's like kind of a bipedal rat-like creature, sort of. So it almost feels like that scene in the Neverending Story where you're at the Ivory Tower and all the different races from Fantasia are convening, and you just look around and it's like, oh, there's that weird thing with 2 heads. Like I guess that's a being. Or Star Wars, right? There's like different beings in this world, which I love. The other thing about the world that I like is that this is a world in decline, even though it is very cute and cartoonish on its surface. And I think the best Final Fantasy games do a really good job of selling this tone of like the world is heading towards a disaster and it's kind of melancholy and sad.
Yeah, and to that end, to the end of the geopolitics and the world in decline, this kind of starts to tiptoe into the realm of story, but there are themes of typical for Sakaguchi environmentalism and anti-war, specifically thinking about things like weapons of mass destruction, which was on a lot of people's minds back when this came out in the early 2000s. You mentioned the world as a whole is in decline. That's generally true, but there are still affluent areas like Lindblom, for example, is one of the first towns you go to that has an excess of means. They are financially and fiscally very affluent, and that shows in the attitudes of the people and how it's governed, and how other nations tend to view it. And they all coalesce to make something really. I should say too. I apologize. I don't mean to get off track, but it's not political in the same way as like Final Fantasy Tactics or 12 is. Those are like politics forward,
Like Game of
This
Thrones
is like
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, totally. I've even heard 12 just called Star Wars, like Final Fantasy Star Wars.
Yeah, and 16 is even more, leans harder into that, and like the Game of Thrones kind of idea of like these are nation states at war.
Yeah,
kind of
there's
stuff.
and there's definitely politics in here, but they're at most they're in the passenger seat. They're not in the driver's seat really ever.
Yeah, yeah. The characters you play as are very much a fantasy party of people being kind of buffeted by the forces at work in this game and trying to sort of work their way around that to achieve their goals. But there's also a lot of mystery in this game. There's a lot of intrigue in terms of like what's really going on. They hit you right up front with some characters that are like, well, these characters seem like they're clearly evil, but what's really going on takes a long time to unfold. And we will talk about kind of the overarching plot elements here. But what I love about it is the series got kind of grimdark in 7 and 8. And I still like 7 a lot. I think it's a really cool world. It's an interesting place, but it is, pretty dour by comparison to this. Like this is very, on the surface, light, cartoony looking stuff, more of a piece with, say, like Final Fantasy 1 than even like 4 or 6. They really want to give you this idea of like, these are cute, cuddly cartoon characters who are not realizing that death is coming for them.
Yeah. And, that was part of the reason that this game wasn't, at the time when it was contemporary, looked upon as favorably as 7 and 8. I mean, partly because 7 was such a monumental event that it was difficult really for anything to come after, no matter what it would have been, to live up to that. And 8 was the unfortunate forebearer of that brunt, excuse me. But 9 coming in with its decidedly lighter tone, as you mentioned, the more chibi look, closer to 1, as you said, it was such a departure that it kind of jostled people in their seats a little bit too much. And now the game is very well beloved now in retrospect, looking back, but apparently at the time, and I say apparently because I was a kid, I didn't really pay attention to that kind of thing. I guess at the time, folks were not as hot on this. They were wanting more of 7.
And as the older of us, I can vouch that is true. It reminds me a lot of the reaction that people had even more viscerally to Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. They took Link from The Legend of Zelda, who up until that point in 3D space had looked kind of more like a mature warrior, and they remade him into an adorable little cartoon. And people lost their goddamn minds over it in a way that is like hard to imagine anyone getting that upset over anything that is not, say, I don't know, critical politics or something like, like the level of anger over Toon Link is, cannot be understated. I don't know why. That game is flawless. But anyway, but you're right. Like people were against it. And I think the music, which you'll be hearing throughout this podcast, this is one of Nobuo Uematsu's best scores, I think. I put this one on all the time to listen to it because it's just beautiful. But also, like, it doesn't have nearly as much of the industrial kind of sound that 7 and 8 do. It goes back to something similar to 6. Again, my favorite Final Fantasy soundtrack. But this is a much more, like, Renaissance instrumentation, a lot less, heavy percussion. This feels like a, capital F fantasy score.
Yeah, it's kind of a fascinating thing, really. I mean, Uematsu 1 through 5 were good, the OSTs. 4 stands out among them, I think. But you get to 6, and it's just phenomenal score after phenomenal score. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, just nonstop. On any given day, I think 9, 8, and 6 are kind of competing for my favorite OST. I think those are just all top tier. Actually, his favorite OST of mine may be Lost Odyssey for the Xbox 360. Not 100% on that. Maybe it's in the running. But 9, you are right. It is. It's less. In 7, for example, there is you hear a lot of synth influence, right? There's a lot of that, not quite 70s synth like you might hear in music from the 70s, but it's much more sci-fi-esque. 9 begins with a recorder consort. It's straight Renaissance music, like you said. And the writing mirrors that. It's not tonal insofar as we think about traditional commonplace harmony today, where you get your 1 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord back to 1, tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic. It doesn't do that because that's not how harmony was in the Renaissance. It hadn't been written or thought about in that way. And Uematsu is writing in that style. So it's very modal, and, melodies go on for a bar or two more than you might expect if you're used to, popular music. And they never have that kind of quote unquote cadence that you're expecting. It's really beautiful until they do, though, right? Because this game also has some more gritty or piano rock almost. His Elton John influence kind of comes through on some of these piano tracks, like the Zorn and Thorn track. Or Gargan Rue is another one that gets very heavy. Or Trano turns into ragtime.
A lot of 7th chords on that.
Yeah, exactly so. It's terrific. This soundtrack is just a masterclass in how to do it.
And it fits with the overall thing they were going for with this game in terms of tying it into its predecessors, not literally tying it in terms of story elements directly, but this game contains an enormous amount of tonal references to its predecessors, and I think musically it does that too. So, for example, the theme when we finally meet kind of one of the main villains of this game, Garland. Garland, first of all, his name is the same as the villain from Final Fantasy 1. The music they have for him is this very kind of somber, stately organ music. Which is fairly similar to the organ music that is the theme for the villain in Final Fantasy IV. They're using every part of the buffalo basically that like to do this, where you're playing something in this game and you are being reminded of stuff from the earlier entries, but it's not just like pure lame fan service. It's like, it's actually really elevates. It's really fun to see them kind of take these things and just with a very subtle nod to this stuff rather than too many oblique references.
Yeah, and speaking of 4, I don't remember what area it is. I want to say it's one of the final areas you get to called Terra, but the soundtrack there, the theme there is directly inspired from the moon theme in Final Fantasy IV. You put them side by side and it's almost identical. And there are more than just music references too. Like there are little name references, story beats that mirror previous games. They're all over the place. Like there's, I think the Final Fantasy wiki or one of those wikis just has a page dedicated to showing all of the references. It's great.
Yeah, and so it really is done in a way that's a love letter to the series' fans. It's not obtrusive at all. It's all done in a way that enhances this stuff. But I will say that like I think now that it's a good time to kind of transition into the like actual story of this game. If entries 1 through 8 never existed, this game would still stand alone as a great story and a great just quest for its characters. So we don't really have time to recap the whole thing. It took you 4 episodes to do it. So we won't do that, but maybe we can kind of run down the basic stuff in the story in a more condensed way.
Yeah, you mentioned it could stand on its own without that. That's true. A lot of folks will like hesitate to recommend this as the first timers Final Fantasy because of all the references you'll miss. I think those are ancillary. I think those are purely additive to, not purely additive, excuse me. I think they're adjacent. They're supplementary is what I was trying to say to folks that have that experience, but you're not missing quote unquote anything. And to that end too, this game, I mean, like we've both said, this game isn't like story connected directly. This game has a very human thematic identity behind it. When they were when they were composing the story, the developer said that the theme of the game, the theme of the story, is to live! Exclamation point. Like exclamation point has to be there. To live. What does it mean to live? What does it mean? What does living mean to you? And they explore that. What does it mean to live? What does it mean to die? How does one live whenever they're in a precarious situation? How does the quote unquote enemy live? What's their perspective? All of that is explored here. And because it's so ingrained into the human experience, I think this is a brilliant Final Fantasy game to start with.
Yeah, and the characters are really endearing, especially because they start you off with some great ones. First of all, our primary protagonist, Zidane. I pronounce it Zidane. I assume that's incorrect, but that's how I always read it. And he's a cute little blonde guy with a monkey tail. And unlike the other characters who are, humanoid but kind of different races like Star Wars, we don't see anybody else with that monkey tail until very late in the game. So what's cool is you just assume, oh, this is part of the whimsy. And after a while, you start to get this nagging sense of like, why haven't I met any other members of, the monkey tail people? Like, why isn't that, shouldn't we have seen another one by now? What is he? Why does he have that? And by the time we find out what it is, like, it's really cool that they've stretched that out as long as they have. But what I like about him most is, he's a very spunky, he's more Han Solo than he is Luke Skywalker. He's much more humorous. He's got a little bit of an edge to him, as opposed to the protagonists from 7 and 8, which leading up to this are fairly. Cloud has some of this, but he's dealing with some shit, some trauma, and Squall from 8 is like barely talks at all. So this was a nice respite, I think, to give us a very like I said, spunky, wisecracking lead.
Yeah, it also helps the characters in the story that the character dialogue in this game, I think, is way better than 7 and 8, and honestly, better than 10 IMO. And part of that's translation, part of that's writing team. It's a little of both. But yeah, the Zidane is a breath of fresh air. I agree. He's not quite as carefree as Tidus in 10, but, gone are the days of the quote-unquote brooding emo protagonist, which, by the way, I don't agree that Squall is an emo protagonist. I just wanted to throw that out there. But
he comes across
is a spunky
that way,
little
though.
guy.
Yeah, no.
What's that?
I was saying, Squall kind of comes across that way. That's the presentation. And I think that's the stereotype he's kind of stuck with. I agree. There's more to his character than that. But, again, the goal was, I think, with Zidane was to let's do a 180 and give you something totally different.
Totally. And it's not just him either. Like, I think the party in 7... I'll say it this way. One of the greatest things that the 7 remakes have done is give more character depth to all of them. In 7, especially looking at it through a 2024 lens, the characters are pretty flat. They're not super interesting. In 9, I think most, if not all of them are. You've got Zidane, like we've just been talking about. Vivi is this very innocent little boy who goes through a really heartbreaking arc and has to grow up much too quickly, we can say. Steiner, who is personally my favorite character in the game. A lovable oaf that just like the classic cliche comic relief big dumb guy that grows into like this really heartfelt character. And then of course you've got like your token like too cool for school guy, whatever, with a later character named Amarant. But you've got a little bit of everything, and what a colorful cast, right? It's so much fun to spend time with them.
Yeah. We need to talk about Vivi a lot. He is, like I said, one of the best characters across the entire series of games. So, as you said, he's a little boy, but he's a little boy black mage. Meaning he what he looks like is essentially he's a body, like he's a pair of like a jacket and some pants and some gloves and a big floppy wizard hat, but instead of a head, it's basically a black void and two big yellow eyes. And it's a version of the black mage character from the original Final Fantasy in terms of the design. And what we come to learn is these are artificial beings that are being created as warriors. And most of them are kind of bigger, scarier versions. He's like a defect, sort of, that he's small and adorable. But the key thing about them is they only live for 1 year. And so he has to come to grips real fast with, okay, I only have a year on this planet. I better make the most of it, unless I can find a way to prevent my death. That's always kind of hanging over him as well. But he's still really like, you feel for his predicament, but he and Zidane are both like the cheerleaders of the group. They're really always kind of piping in with like, come on, we can do it. We can overcome this problem in a way that is like, it feels really endearing that they take this incredibly positive approach to everybody else.
Yeah. And I could see that. And they're contrasted by a lot of the other party members. One of the main female leads, Garnet, she's a little more level-headed, although still quite naive due to her royal background. Steiner obviously is an oaf that just kind of butts heads against Zidane at every single turn and every single corner. It makes for an entertaining cast as well. Like this game is funny. I think it's worth mentioning. This game is really funny for as heartfelt as it is. You might not expect it.
Yeah, and Steiner's great. So Steiner is like the captain of the guard for the nation of Burmecia, where we start the game. And his kind of arc is he is blindly loyal to the crown, but he also is, fiercely loyal in his need to protect the Princess Garnet. So when Garnet kicks off the plot by engineering her own kidnapping at the hands of Zidane, that's how things get started. Steiner ends up following along with her because even though he's loyal to the crown, he needs to keep her alive. And it takes him a long time to kind of come around to realize that the kingdom he's loyal to, at least the government of the kingdom he's loyal to, is in the wrong. They're evil. Sort of. We'll get to that. But the queen has been corrupted and is evil. And so it's really interesting to watch this guy have to sort of kind of get deprogrammed over the course. Like how many war crimes do you have to witness before you kind of recognize you're on the bad guy team?
Yeah. Yeah. But he does change, to his credit, he does change. He's got my favorite arc of the entire game. Largely because you get to see him work through it. It's really rewarding to see somebody that has such intense blinders on and tunnel vision sort of work through why that's maybe not a way to live, quote, to live, exclamation point. And by the end, what we see is a dignified man.
I think that's right. Yeah, he ceases to become oafish, and all of his best qualities end up coming to the forefront in terms of being someone who is, loyal in a good way and, stands up for what's right and protects people. All of the things he thought he was doing by serving his country, he learns he has to work against that country to put the right leader, Garnet, on the throne. You've got, who else is in the party? You've got Freya, who we talked about. She is kind of a knight from this neighboring country. I'm trying to remember where she comes from, the name of it. I'm blanking.
Bermesia.
She's from Bermesia. That's right. So where's Garnet is Alexandria. Sorry.
Alexandria.
I mixed that up. So she's from Bermesia, and their country has been kind of battered from various wars, but she also is like, she's steadfastly loyal to her people, but she's one of the ones that's kind of quickest to recognize that the real threat is kind of something else. That all of the warring going on between these countries is kind of a distraction, or really kind of the product of the true villains' motives, which is to get all of these different countries fighting each other instead of working together.
Right, and the chief one that's doing the attacking from the start is Alexandria, whose queen is Garnet's mother. So Garnet runs away from home and joins us willingly. We actually we begin the game on a mission to kidnap her, because that's what we were hired to do. And she comes willingly because she wants to get out of there. She knows that something's not right because her mother is acting so weird. And Bermesia and Clara, those are two neighboring cities that are full of basically the same race of people. Bermesia and Clara is one of the first to get, or two of the first, to get absolutely obliterated by Queen Braun and the Alexandria forces. And the whole time, Garnet has to reckon with the fact that that's her mother, and she's trying to say, like, no, this isn't, like, something's wrong, she's not herself, and everybody else is like, she's committing war crimes. Like, what are you talking about? And it, as you said, it develops in a very interesting way because all is not as it seems on the surface.
Yeah, she is under the thrall of the true villains. It's, kind of the classic twist of like, oh, she wasn't actually evil all along. She just was being controlled by outer forces, beyond her ken, basically. But she presents, they want to make her appear evil. Like, picture sort of like Ursula from The Little Mermaid. Like, she's big, she's blue, she's ugly. Like, they kind of do everything to make you go like, no one on Earth would ever look at her and go, well, this is the good guy. They everything about her is evil. She's got two little evil court jesters who work for her. What are they? Thorn and Horn, I think are their names, right?
Zorn
and Thorn. Yeah, that's right. So she's got clown henchmen. That's bad. And she, as you said, she's invading other countries, attacking them. And I guess we should start to kind of get to what the central mystery is. So they're all chasing this thing for a while called like the Lifa tree. Because there's this mist that surrounds all of the various, most of the world is, the continents are kind of up above this mist. But if you go down into it, like this mist basically generates monsters. It like coalesces into evil things. And it's all being kind of exuded from this tree. And so the goal is, let's get to this tree, figure out the source of this, and try and stop it. And that's when you get to the tree and you kind of start learning a little more about what's really going on.
Yeah, that tree ends up being a sort of vessel. The whole continent is covered in mist, right? It's called the Mist Continent, and this mist is what's causing all of these fiends and monsters to pop up and act hostile. And the tree is being used to produce this mist intentionally by the villain of the main antagonist of the game, the one that's thralling Queen Braun, as you said.
Yeah, and that's Kuja, who we've not talked about yet. Kuja has the tail, like Zidane does. He's sort of, he's a little pixelated. You know, again, this is PS1 era graphics, but picture like, almost like he's got a little bit of a David Bowie feel to him. Like a Ziggy Stardust kind of, you know, glam, Aladdin Sane Bowie, but in like a white fur bodysuit, sort of. It's a little hard to read his sprite for me, but yeah, he is the one, like, you, as you're making your way through the quest, he keeps just kind of popping up to give you a hard time. And we understand that, like, Zidane has a history with him, but he's partially amnesiac, so he doesn't quite remember what's going on. And so you figure out that what the Leafa tree is it's basically a machine that recycles the souls of the people living on this planet. That's part of the normal cycle of life and death, which has been co-opted by an invading extraterrestrial force. Essentially, this other planet was dying, and they said, well, if we just sort of take our souls and put them into this cycling process, they'll get recycled and reincarnated into the beings on this planet, and we'll just take over, which is, you know, a fantasy version of a story that's basically as old as the War of the Worlds.
Yeah, and you know, if it sounds like there's a lot of information being dropped at you, they do a pretty good job at drip feeding it throughout the plot, so you know of some machinations that are in motion. And you learn of the updates and what's really going on as you go through. It's not all dropped on you, which is nice. They do get a little bit trigger happy with the new information toward the very end, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. But it's never so much that the plot, you lose the thread of the plot, like a lot of people will bring up with Final Fantasy VIII, for example.
Yeah, you're right. Again, we're condensing this heavily. That when this is spread out over the course of, you know, the many hours it takes to play this game, it doesn't feel like such a dump of information, and it's a little easier to digest. I got to go back. We didn't talk about Quina, our party members. We got to mention Quina. Quina is so weird. Quina is this genderless marshmallow guy with a giant floppy tongue, and his like class is chef. Super weird character.
Yeah, functionally the blue mage of the group. So if you think back to Final Fantasy VI, your blue mage, well, you kind of had a couple, but like Gao would be the closest point of comparison. You once an enemy is weak enough, you can eat them, and you learn their abilities. Now, if you want to go through the game and like have an OP character, Quina is the one to choose. Her abilities they can just be astoundingly good. It's crazy.
Yeah, you have to know who to eat to get there.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's just a weird concept. And again, like you've used a female pronoun. Like they kind of go out of their way to let you know that like it's a third gender, or you don't know what this is. Like again, it looks like a big blue marshmallow, sort of with a big floppy tongue, wearing a pink like chef's outfit, which is part of a race of these beings that all look like this. It's very weird. But it's a lot of fun, and it again putting like whimsy into this game that is about the end of the world. But yeah, I really love this. There's the first moment you kind of start to get what happened. The true story is you go to these like ancient ruins that were built by the Terrans. That's the invading force. And you can like go and there's all these like creepy like talking masks that start to tell you like how their world was dying and they were running out of options and what to do. And so what I like about it is like there's a melancholy to this. Like it's like they didn't deserve to die either. You know, their race is dying. They deserve a chance to live, as you said.
Right, and once you start piecing all of this together, you eventually get to meet this tribe of, it's essentially where Zidane comes from, right? Part of Zidane's arc, his whole journey is trying to find out what home means. You know, he's looking for his family, he's looking for a place to call home, and ultimately he finds that it's a little trite to say it out loud, but he finds that home is where the heart is, so to speak. Home is the friends and the family that you make, not necessarily the ones you're born into. But we get to see these this race that Zidane comes from, and they are all genomes at this point. They're kind of quote unquote clones because of how the life and death cycle is working, and all of them seem complacent with it. So it opens up this philosophical discussion at the end of the game, excuse me, where it becomes much more explicit. They're asking like, you know, you seem to be okay with just not questioning your life and why you're here and where you're going. Why are you not okay with that? Why are you not okay with taking your life into your own hands and making the most of it? Like we are, like we're all doing, or are we? And then everybody gets a little bit existential and philosophical at the end, most of whom is Zidane. He goes through a bit of like a mental breakdown towards the end, a true existential crisis, like straight out of Albert Camus. He starts questioning like, you know, his worth and if everything's been worth it, and he's just essentially a failure. He's breaking down, and that leads to one of the big climactic moments of the game where friendship is power is basically the theme on display here, where everybody comes in to build him up and says how much they appreciate him, and you know they snap him out of it pretty quickly. But it's the latter half of this game, for as much crap as this end game gets from some fans and some community members, JRPG community members, I should say. The last half of the game does open up a lot of the really interesting discussion into like ideas greater than the game, like real life ideas.
And it's a compelling idea that they've hit on multiple times. So the overarching plot in Final Fantasy IV is, as far as I know, the first version of this. It could have been in 2, 3, or 5. I never played them, but that's also part of the villain's plan, is ultimately like, we're going to take our race and supplant yours. And they would do this again in 16. 16 is very much about this exact thing. So it's a philosophical question the company is definitely interested in. I still like this articulation of it the best. And it's like when you meet all of the Terrans, as you said, they are these kind of, they might as well be living mannequins. They're pretty, blank. And that's because, again, their souls are not really there. Their souls are being shoved down to Gaia, the planet where all of this is taking place. And they're trying to put all their souls into the rinse cycle so that they can be born anew. And it is weird that this ends up becoming kind of an alien invasion story, but it's told in a great way. And as you said, we learned that Zidane he's not just one of these beings. Like, he and Kuja, the other main villain, were created by Garland, the kind of this AI that's in charge of the repopulation program. to be kind of an angel of death and like implement this. And he lost his Zidane lost his memory, and so ended up going native. And he struggles, as you said, mightily with this idea of like, but what I'm supposed to do is help this process along. And he decides to go against that programming and again side with our heroes.
Yeah, I've got Dragon Ball on the brain right now because of Sparking Zero. Zidane's kind of like Goku, right? He was sent down to destroy the planet, but he realized he actually loves it here, and he takes a new name. And he's like, well, Zidane doesn't take a new name, but he's like, no, this is my home now. And his brother comes down to fight him. I guess it's just like Dragon Ball Z, actually, now that I'm thinking about it.
I wouldn't be surprised if they were directly inspired by that in the development of this. Again, they're synthesizing a lot of pre-existing stuff to make this game. And then sort of, the end game kind of takes this weird turn where you defeat Garland and you think, well, that'll do it. But Kuja's still out there trying to get powered up. And you have to go into this. Essentially, what he's trying to do is like, not just, he's kind of the antithesis of life in general. He's going to go back to sort of this crystal that is the source of all life in the universe and destroy it. Like, that's kind of his goal, is to just sort of upend the entire system. Because once he learns this about himself, he goes in the opposite direction of Zidane. He becomes an incredible nihilist.
Yeah, he more so than more so than Kuja. That's who we're talking about. More so than Kefka in 6, which I still don't think nihilism is the right term for Kefka, but Kuja, at the very end is hellbent on just destroying everything, right? When because another important wrinkle to note here, and forgive me if you said this and I just forgot already, but Zidane was, Garland anticipated Kuja failing, so he sent Zidane down. And in essence, Zidane is stronger than Kuja, and Kuja just cannot let that stand. Now, of course, Zidane being stronger also means he's stronger in will, so there's a whole scene after we fight him and beat him where Zidane still extends the olive branch and, saves him. I don't know how I feel about that personally. I don't love it. I have at various times said that this game is kind of the best of all of the Final Fantasies up until this point. That also kind of includes the best of its missteps. Final Fantasies are kind of, the cliche is that they have a soggy, last third or last fourth. And, there are moments of that in 9 too.
Yeah, I think 6 and 7 end stronger than this, because they don't fall it. Like, the villain in 6 and 7 is the villain, right? Kefka is behind everything. He is trying to destroy the world. Sephiroth is trying to destroy the world. He is the guy you fight at the end. But when you fight Kuja, they pull out this kind of trick that they did in Final Fantasy IV, which is, you thought you killed the real villain, you stopped him, but in fact, what you've done is unleashed something worse. Right? Because when you defeat Kuja, you don't kill him, but you defeat him. It summons this this entity that you've never heard of before in the game. This, we got to have you fight a giant monster. It's got to be something big and scary. So basically, you might as well be fighting Cthulhu at this point. It's just this big entity that just represents destruction of all life. It's just the forces of entropy, or however you want to call it.
Yeah, the name is Necron. I'm paraphrasing what I said in my episodes, and I don't mean to kind of push those to the front at the moment, but I don't think I'm going to articulate it better than I did there. The game Necron is widely disliked among the JRPG community and Final Fantasy community. My take on it is narratively, it can be a bit of a letdown because, like you said, he kind of comes out of nowhere. He's never been introduced until this very moment. Thematically, it's kind of there. It couldn't have ended another way. Thematically, this is sort of like the theme of the game itself, fighting the final boss, which is the antithesis of that theme. So it's not the characters overcoming their final hurdle. It's the game's ideology itself. Now, different people are going to have different tolerances for that. I eat that. Or can we swear on this podcast?
As much as you want.
Oh, I eat that shit up. Like, I love that. I love that kind of thing. I love games getting like philosophical and like meta outside of the game. A lot of people don't though. So if you know, when people say, "Oh, I hate Necron, he sucks," it's like, I don't agree, but I get it. I totally do.
I don't think he sucks. I just think they could have maybe thrown a few more breadcrumbs into the game to hint at its existence.
Totally.
So that when it shows up, you're like, oh no, we summoned the thing that we've heard about.
Even if it was like little tidbits of lore that you get from talking to NPCs, and like even if they're missable, even if you could just read it in a book, it would have extended that little olive branch to make it more not expected, but like not a total surprise.
Yeah, explain this is the entity that it caused the Terrans. That's why their planet died, was because of this thing, or something, just to give it a little more a depth than it is. But that again, criticizing like the 1% of a thing at the end of this game, it's like don't lose the joy that you had with the 99% that came before it. Like as you said, the theme of the game is not just to be alive or survive, but to live. And I think like we've kind of talked through the general stuff in the plot, but like I want to talk about that moment where you go to the Black Mage village. So the Black Mages are basically manufactured out of this mist to be weapons of war. But many of them, like Vivi, have begun to become self-aware. And they've kind of all found their way to this little village, this isolated village that's inside of a magic bubble of protection where they can thrive and be happy and live out their short little lives. And you watch these really interesting like vignettes where there's a cemetery for them because they don't last very long. And like you watch them struggling to understand the concept of death, where like they talk about like, oh yeah, this is my friend. And then one day he wasn't moving anymore, like really kind of existential crisis type stuff for a game like this.
And one of the strengths of how this is written too is, like you said, it's Vivi and this whole village grappling and accepting the idea that life is finite, right? And that their lives in particular are short because they are artificial creations. What I love about this is they don't, how do I want to phrase it? They don't condescend to the players by trying to make Vivi suddenly speak like he is an intelligent adult speaking to the players. Maybe condescend's not the right word. They're trusting the characters so much that Vivi is able to explore this as a child. One quick example is they don't use the term die. Like they introduce it as, oh, they stopped. Like they stopped and we put him in the ground. And, when he starts again, we're going to clean him off in the river. And like Vivi in the moment doesn't know exactly, but we as players were like, oh my God, and as Vivi grows and learns, he begins to accept this idea of mortality and the practicality of what it means to live and die in the same way that a child would. He's not immediately grasping at things like, well, what does it mean to be the afterlife? And, well, this means that the virtues of being a good person. No, like he's working through it like a 9-year-old child would, because I think in the game that's how he's characterized, as like 9 years old. And that's brilliant. Had they gone another way and had him start speaking as if, he was suddenly an adult and waxing all poetic, it would have been so much less effective. It would have been a cop-out. But they didn't do that. They trusted the writing team, and they trusted the characters they created, and they trusted the players too. And it's brilliant. I love the way they handled this.
Yeah, I think thematically, again, to go all the way back to the source at Lord of the Rings, like I think of that moment where Gandalf basically says, all you can do is choose what to do with the time that is given to you. And that's basically the realization that Vivi has, and the rest of the characters too, to a degree, which is, well, if we don't stop this crisis, who will? Like, what else are we going to do with our time? We can just, again, sit around and do nothing until we quote unquote stop, or, we can make the most of this time. And that's why I think this game is resonant, in a way that some of the other games, a lot of the other games, the entries are fun. I think this one really punches above its weight class in terms of trying to deal with interesting philosophical questions. And that's not to say the other games don't do this, but this one really, I think, sticks in the forefront because it is so much about mortality and friendship and all of those things within that context, right? The power of friendship is by itself not that compelling of a theme. But when you pair it with this other stuff about like, well, what are we going to do with our time? We're going to live for our friends. We're going to do what we can to protect the people we love with this limited time. And even in the face of impossible odds, we're going to fight because that's better than laying down and dying.
Right. And all of the character arcs too, like each character is going to have their own theme. They all fit squarely within the grand theme of the game, to live. It's a very narratively focused experience. If you let this idle on the title screen, you'll see cards of each character come up, and it will summarize sort of the thematic idea behind their character story. Zidane's virtue. You don't need a reason to help someone. Steiner, I forget what the word is, but having sword and fealty, must I live my life in servitude. Quina, I do what I want. You have problem? It's like that's each of the essence of the character's story, and how it's going to be explored within this idea of to live. Well, that's up to the game to tell. But it all does it extremely well, except for Emerant. Except for Emerant. Yeah. He sucks. I hate him.
Yeah, he's just it's weird. It's like someone said, like, we have to have 8 total characters in your party to choose from. So let's bring in an 8th guy. Like, yeah, he really doesn't have an arc. He doesn't bring much to the table. In every one of these games, there's at least one character that I kind of bench. It's Kate Shi in Final Fantasy VII. Like, I find that guy useless. Mm-hmm. In Final Fantasy VI, they give you, I think, 14 playable characters. So there's always going to be a few that kind of, Strago can sit this one out. He's in Realm. They're useless for me. And so he's that here, which is like, it's not even that he's that useless a character in terms of his combat abilities, but I don't have a story reason to get that invested in him. So I'm going to pick the other characters over him every time. But that's okay. There's the characters that do remain are really great. They're compelling. They're interesting. And they're just fun to spend time with. And you're going to be spending a lot of time with them as you traverse the entire planet that this game takes place on. And yeah, again, if the goal was, let's create something like Lord of the Rings, you got to have a good fellowship. And I think that's what we have here.
Absolutely. Man, that just makes me want to go through Lord of the Rings again. I haven't seen those movies in ages.
I've been itching to do a podcast on those movies, and I don't know how I would do it, if I would do it in one episode or 3, because they are very long. But they are my favorite movie. I called that my favorite movie of all time, that trilogy. So it's in the wish list, but I don't know how I'm going to actually approach it because it's such a big meatball. But
yeah, they hold up too. They hold up amazingly well,
beautifully. Yeah, I really want to. My kids are 5 and 8, so I think my daughter is just old enough. She's read The Hobbit. We read The Hobbit together.
Oh wow!
And she's watched the Rankin Bass animated Hobbit. Like, we don't need to watch the Peter Jackson ones; those are, forget it. But I'm just sort of waiting for, like, oh, finally we're gonna get to go on the quest, and I will find a way to turn it into content, goddammit, because if I'm going to watch 9.5 hours of movie, I really want to enjoy it by taking a lot of notes. That's what I want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the life of a podcaster.
Yeah. Well, Rick, thanks for coming on. I'm really glad we got to talk about Final Fantasy IX. This is, like we've said all along, this is just a delight, this game. If you haven't played it, go out and find it. It's on every console and on Steam, and it's actually been up-resed quite nicely, so it looks even better than it ever did. So, hey, at a minimum, if you don't feel like playing the game, go buy the soundtrack. It's gorgeous. Before we go, I know there's rumors of a remake, since they had so much success remaking 7. If if money ultimately talks and they decide to do it, what would you want to see in a remake of Final Fantasy IX?
That's a complicated question.
I know it's kind of perfect the way it is. Like, don't mess with it, but
well, exactly that. I don't think it needs remade. I don't know what they could possibly. I don't know what could enhance the experience such that it requires a remake. I mean, other than money, I just don't get it. And because now Final Fantasy is no longer turn based, they want to be action, like action hack and slash, kind of like Kingdom Hearts. They're probably going to go that direction. To be honest, I'm going to play it if it comes out. I definitely will play it. I think what I would just like to say to people that are looking forward to it, or that are playing the remake, the alleged remake first, is that just remember it doesn't replace the original, right? You can always go back to it. And I can always go back to it. I don't have to yell at people playing the remake. They can exist too. It's fine.
Yeah, I would be more gloom and doom about it if they hadn't done so well with 7. I really enjoyed 7 Remake. I'm very much enjoying 7 Rebirth. The fact that they could take this game and blow it out to that size, the only way it works is because those games, yes, they're padding out the story to a degree, but what they're padding it with is a lot of character development. And because Final Fantasy IX's strength is its characters and its world, if they apply the lessons they've learned from 7 to 9, I'm more encouraged about what that product might look like. Yeah, any other closing thoughts about, why do you think it is that people still love going back to Final Fantasy IX all this time? Why is nostalgia for Final Fantasy IX still viable?
I think people still like experiencing this game because it's so resonant from a human perspective, and, at least in my opinion, it is the best of that era of Final Fantasy, the best of pre-3D, pre-10 Final Fantasy that there is to offer, I think.
Yeah. And for me, I think, again, it's that human element you keep hitting on, which is this story is emotionally resonant in a way that, even among the series, which is generally pretty good at doing that, this hits a little bit harder in the feels in a way you don't expect it to, while also giving you a very beautiful, polished, interesting product. The actual, like, the rest of the game itself is supported by all of those things. But like, as in terms of Final Fantasy stories, I find myself thinking about it's this and 6 more than any of the others, because of the very human elements of both of those stories. So, yeah, I'm really glad we did this. Thank you for coming on. If people want to find Pixel Project Radio or your other projects, where do they go?
Sure. You can go anywhere that you listen to your podcasts: Spotify, YouTube Music, Apple, whichever you prefer. Or you can find us on social media. We're most active on Instagram and Twitter. We do also have a BlueSky. I have a Threads, but I don't use it ever. But yeah, you can find us there. You can check out the stuff that we have on offer. Final Fantasy IX, we've got 5 episodes on it. The first one is just an essay that is disconnected from the rest of the game. So, if you like that, you can just check it out and then, save 10 hours by not listening to the rest. But it's all there for you. And thank you, Doug, for inviting me on. I really don't think we could have picked a better topic for the first discussion.
I agree. I'm really glad we got to talk about this one because it is a very special game. If you want to find our stuff, just go to your social media network of choice and look for Nostalgia Arcanum. You'll find it because nothing is spelled that way. It's the only thing of its kind. So you'll find us there. Instead of promoting what's coming up next, I would just tell you to subscribe to our Facebook or Instagram accounts, because every Wednesday I will post a little picture or set of pictures that are a clue to what's coming up the following Monday. So look there for that. Just have fun guessing, seeing what's up there. I try to make it doable, but sometimes they are pretty obtuse, but give it a go. And normally I would tell you, if you had comments about what you just heard, but I'm recording this fairly far in advance, and I'm not sure if this is going to be part of our Christmassy stuff for December, because it's a toy, sort of. It counts. So I don't know if you're going to hear this in December or sometime in 2025, but there's always good stuff coming down the pike, especially if you like the video game stuff. We've done a fair number of video game episodes up to this point. So go look for, say we've done one on like classic stuff usually. So like Mega Man 2, Simon's Quest. We did one on the Legend of Zelda franchise. And as we said, Final Fantasy 6, we did one on Chrono Trigger, which might as well be another Final Fantasy game. And several more. Doom was in the mix. We did Doom a while back. So go look for those if that's what you're interested in. But of course, that'll kind of do it for this discussion. And Rick, you're welcome back here anytime. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I'd love to. I've got, there are plenty of games and toys and TV shows to think about.
Well, tell you what, you think about it and let me know what you want to do next, and we'll set it up. So, all right, everybody. So until next time, that is one more entry in the Nostalgium Arcanum.
Alone for a while, I've been searching through the dark for traces of the love you left inside my lonely heart, to weave by picking up the pieces that remain, melodies of life, love's lost refrain. Our paths they did cross, though I cannot say just why. We met, we left, we held on fast, and then we said goodbye. And who'll hear the echoes of stories never told? Let them ring out loud till they unfold. In my dearest memories, I see you reaching out to me, and you're gone. I still believe that you can call out my name, a voice from the past, joining yours and mine, adding up the layers of harmony. And so it goes on and on, melodies of life, to the sky beyond the flying birds, forever and beyond.
Dungeons and Dragons. Satan's game. Your children, like it or not, are attracted in their weaker years to the occult, and a game like D&D fuels their imagination and makes them feel special, while drawing them deeper and deeper into the bowels of El Diablo. This afternoon, the Dead Alewives Watchtower invites you to sit in on an actual gaming session. Observe the previously unobservable as a hidden camera takes you to the inner sanctum of Dungeons and Dragons.
Gallstaff, you have entered the door to the north. You are now by yourself, standing in a dark room. The pungent stench of mildew emanates from the wet dungeon walls.
Where are the Cheetos?
They're right next to you.
I cast a spell. Where's the Mountain Dew?
In the fridge, duh!
I want to cast a spell.
Can
I have a Mountain Dew?
Yes, you can have a Mountain Dew, just go get it.
I can cast any of these, right? On the list?
Yes, any of the first level ones.
I'm gonna get a soda. Anyone want one? Hey, Graham, I'm not in the room, right?
What room?
I want to cast Magic Missile.
A room where he's casting all these spells from.
He hasn't cast anything yet.
I am, though, if you'd listen. I'm casting Magic Missile.
Why are you casting Magic Missile? There's nothing to attack here.
I
I'm attacking the darkness.
Fine. You attack the darkness. There's an elf in front of you.
Whoa!
That's me, right?
He's wearing a brown tunic, and he has gray hair and blue eyes.
No, I don't. I have gray eyes.
Let me see that sheet.
Well, it says I have blue, but I decided I wanted gray eyes.
Whatever. Okay, you guys can talk to each other now if you want.
Hello.
Hello.
I am Galstaff, Sorcerer of Light.
Then how come you had to cast magic missile?
You guys are being attacked.
Do I see that happening?
No, you're outside by the tavern.
Cool, I get